On a Tuesday in late March, in the kitchen of a house that no longer felt like hers, a 53-year-old woman sat at the table and opened her bank account on her phone. The number on the screen was $201.47. She looked at it for a long time. Not because she had trouble reading it, but because some part of her kept expecting it to change. On a Tuesday in late March, in the kitchen of a house she would have to leave by the end of the month, a 51-year-old woman sat at the table and looked at the number on her phone screen. $211.47. She had checked it 3 times already, each time thinking she had read it wrong. She had not read it wrong. Her name was Lenora Marsh, and she had spent 22 years building a life with a man who turned out to have been building something else entirely. Something she only discovered the morning the lawyers arrived. The divorce had been final for 4 months. The house was going to auction. The car was leased in his name. She had her sewing machine, 2 boxes of winter clothes, a ceramic mug her daughter had painted at summer camp 12 years ago, and $211.47. She had been a bookkeeper. She understood numbers. And the number on that screen was the kind that does not leave room for pride. Outside the kitchen window, the March sky over Rivière du Loup sat low and gray. The snow still crusted along the fence line, the kind of cold that Quebec keeps past its welcome. Lenora wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and did not drink from it. She only held it, the way you hold something when your hands need an assignment and your mind refuses to give them one. 3 days later, a registered letter arrived at her sister's address, where she was sleeping on a fold-out couch. It was from a law office in Montreal, the name of a firm she did not recognize. Inside was a single page. Her father's cousin, a man named Gilles Aubert, had died 6 weeks earlier. She had met him twice in her life, once at a family gathering when she was 9, once at a funeral when she was 34. He had said very little on both occasions. He had left her, according to the letter, his entire estate. The letter described the estate as follows: 1 parcel of land on the shore of Lac Saint-Pierre, including a cedar cabin, an outbuilding, a wooden dock, 1 aluminum canoe, and all contents therein. There was a second paragraph. The law office noted as a matter of disclosure that the property had been assessed by the municipal assessor's office the previous autumn. The assessed value was 0. Lenora read the letter twice. Then she set it down on the fold-out couch and laughed, a short, dry sound that had nothing cheerful in it. Of all the things a woman starting over at 51 needed most in the world, a worthless piece of waterfront land in the St. Lawrence lowlands was not among them. She called the law office. A polite young man told her that the land sat in a flood zone, that no bank would mortgage it, that the outbuilding was in poor repair, and that the dock had not been inspected in years. He confirmed that the assessed value was in fact $0. He added gently that Monsieur Aubert had been something of an unusual man. She asked what he meant by that. He said only that Monsieur Aubert had kept to himself, that he had lived at the property year-round for more than 3 decades, and that the estate contained no other assets, no savings account, no investments, nothing but the land and whatever was inside the cabin. Lenora thanked him, hung up, and sat on the fold-out couch for a long time. $211.47 in her account. A worthless piece of land. A man she barely knew had thought of her, and she did not know whether to be grateful or to cry. She went to see it the following weekend. Now, before we go any further, if you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of something you didn't understand and weren't sure you wanted, this story is for you. We've seen a lot here at Epic Stories, but this one stopped us in our tracks. If you want to see where Lenora's story goes, and trust me, you do, subscribe to the channel right now and leave us a comment telling us where in Canada you're watching from. Every single comment helps this story find someone who needs it. All right. Let's go back to Lenora driving north along the river in her sister's borrowed car. The road in was unpaved, just under a kilometer of gravel and frozen mud cutting through a stand of birch and poplar that leaned close enough to brush the mirrors. Lenora drove slowly. She was not sure what she was expecting. Something abandoned, something sad. What she found was something she had no word for. The cabin was small, gray cedar gone silver with years, the roof line straight, the chimney intact. The outbuilding behind it listed slightly to the east, one corner propped on a stone that was not quite the right size. The dock ran out into the ice-gray water of the lake, the far planks dark with moisture, a few boards missing near the end. The aluminum canoe was overturned on the bank, its bottom scraped clean in a way that spoke of habit rather than accident. Lenora stood in the cold and looked at it for a long time. A bookkeeper looks at a set of accounts and reads a story. Lenora looked at this property and tried to read its story, and the story she fed was nothing. Zero. An old man at the end of the earth with nothing to show for it. She walked around the cabin. The woodpile at the side was stacked in an orderly way, split to an even size, covered with a tarp weighed down by stones. A careless man does not split his wood evenly and cover it against the snow. She tried the front door. It was unlocked. Inside smelled of cedar and pipe tobacco and old paper, and the cold of a space not heated in weeks. There was a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a shelf of paperback novels, a set of hooks by the door with a coil of rope and a worn orange life jacket hanging from them. And in the corner, under a small window that looked out at the lake, a wooden writing desk. The surface clear except for a small oil lamp and a hardbound notebook, closed, with a pencil set in the fold. Lenora crossed the room and opened the notebook. The first page said, in a French she had to read slowly, Les gens du lac, ceux qui sont restés, the people of the lake, those who stayed. Below it in the careful columns of a man who had taught himself to keep records. A name, a date, a short note. She stood at the desk and read the first page, then the second. Then she pulled the chair out and sat down in the cold cabin in her coat and scarf and read, till the light through the small window had gone from white to yellow to gray. She did not call her sister that night. She drove back to Rivière-du-Loup in silence and sat in the borrowed car in the parking lot of the apartment block, and did not go inside for a long time. Because the man she had met twice in her life and never truly known had spent 34 years doing something at the edge of that lake, and the notebook she had read was the record of it. And what she had read in that notebook had rearranged something in her chest she could not name. Gilles Aubert had never owned a boat with a motor. He had only the canoe, and for 34 years he had paddled that canoe across Lac Saint-Pierre in every season, through rain and through ice out, and through the flat heat of August, to carry people across the water to the far shore where the road to town ran. Because the people on his side of the lake, the old ones, the ones without cars, the families with small children who attended the school across the water, did not have the 40 minutes it took to drive around. They had only the lake and the man who would take them across it. He charged nothing that she could find any record of. A few entries noted in exchange. Madame Terrien brought eggs, took nothing. Or the Beaumont boy forgot his backpack again on the far shore, paddled back, did not mention it to him. Most entries noted only the crossing, the person, and a word or two. The entries that stopped her were not the ordinary ones. They were the ones he had marked differently, set apart by a small asterisk in the margin. She had not understood what the asterisk meant until she reached an entry from a February 11 years ago. The Levesque boy. Ice giving at the north end. Heard him before I saw him. Rope over the crack. 3 tries lived. Below it a single asterisk and then, will not tell his mother she has enough. She counted the asterisks later. 14 over 34 years. 14 people the ice or the current or the dark water had tried to take and had not. She also found 7 entries written differently from all the others. In these the handwriting was slower, more deliberate. Each one ended with a date and a single word, disparu, gone. 7 times in 34 years, Gilles Aubert had not been fast enough, or had not known, or the lake had been too much. He had recorded each one with the same careful hand as the ones who lived. He had written their names. He had not left them out. A man who records his failures alongside his rescues is not a man who was keeping the record for his own pride. Lenora drove out to the property again the next Saturday, and the one after that. She told herself she was only going to figure out what could be salvaged, what could be sold. She had no intention of keeping a waterfront property she couldn't afford to maintain, in a flood zone no bank would touch, for the sake of a man she barely knew. She told herself that, and then she kept going back. The cabin was cold but sound. The wood stove worked. She found in the outbuilding the things Gilles had used. Coils of good rope. A set of ice picks hung by the door at height a drowning man could grab, 2 extra life jackets. A hand-painted sign in French and English that said traverse, crossing, free, and had been nailed to a birch at the end of the dock where anyone coming to the shore from the road would see it. She found a hand-drawn map of the lake, annotated in his small writing, showing the safe routes and the dangerous ones, where the current ran under the ice in winter, where the bottom dropped off without warning. She found letters, too. They were in a cardboard box under the desk, tied in bundles with kitchen string. Some were in envelopes. Some were loose, folded once. Most were in French, a few in English. Monsieur Aubert, je ne sais pas comment vous remercier. Monsieur Aubert, I don't know how to thank you. You probably don't remember me, but you carried me across in your canoe every day for 2 winters when I was 12 and my mother couldn't drive. I'm a nurse now. I thought you should know. My son told me what happened on the ice in February. I know you said not to say anything. I'm saying it anyway. God bless you." One letter had no return address, written in a child's handwriting on a page torn from a school notebook. "Même Gilles, vous avez attendu. Personne d'autre n'attend." Monsieur Gilles, you waited. No one else waits. Lenora sat in the cabin with that letter in her hands for a long time. She was a bookkeeper. She understood what it meant when a number didn't balance. She had spent 22 years in a marriage that she had thought was balanced, and had learned at 51 that she had been reading the wrong columns. She had been tracking the visible things, the house, the joint account, the shared calendar, and had not seen the column her husband had been keeping somewhere else for years. But this man, this quiet cousin she had barely known, had kept the only column that mattered, the column of people still alive. She wept in the cold cabin with her coat still on, and she was not sure, when she finally stopped, whether she was weeping for Gilles or for herself, or for the 22 years she had spent misunderstanding what a life was for. There was something else she found. On the 3rd visit, when she finally worked up the nerve to open the flat drawer at the bottom of the writing desk. It was a legal document, folded in thirds, creased with age. The header read in both official languages: Conservation and Public Access Easement, Lac Saint-Pierre Shoreline. She could not read all of it. Her legal French was limited and her legal English not much better. But there was a phrase near the bottom she read 3 times, dedicated in perpetuity to public access and water safety services, non-transferable, non-revocable, binding upon all future holders of title, and below it a date. 17 years ago, Gilles had signed this document 17 years before he died. Had had it notarized, had had it registered with the province, had done it quietly without telling a soul. The way it seemed he did everything that mattered. And Lenora, standing in that cold cabin with a legal document she didn't fully understand, felt the same questions settle over her that she imagined must settle over anyone who discovers a secret kept in love. If she hadn't known about this, what else hadn't she known? She drove back to the law office in Montreal on a Wednesday. The same polite young man. She put the document on his desk and asked him to explain it. He read it. He read it again. Then he called in a colleague, a woman about Lenora's age with reading glasses on a chain, who read it and then looked up. "Do you know what this is?" the woman asked. Lenora said she thought so, but she wanted to be certain. The woman leaned back. "Your cousin, your father's cousin, registered this shoreline property as a provincial water safety station 17 years ago. Under this easement, the property is bound permanently to public access and lake safety use. It cannot be developed. It cannot be fenced. It cannot be converted to private use. And..." She paused and looked at Lenora over the rims of her glasses. "It cannot be sold to a developer and turned into anything else." Lenora asked why that last part mattered. The woman glanced at her colleague. "Because," she said, 3 weeks ago, a development company filed a preliminary application with the municipality to acquire shoreline properties on the north end of Lac Saint-Pierre. The application names this parcel specifically. They want to build a private marina and resort. She set the document down and folded her hands on the desk. "This easement makes that impossible. Legally, permanently impossible. Your cousin appears to have known, or at least anticipated, that someone would try. And we want to stop right here. Because what Lenora was about to discover is the thing that changes the whole story. But before we go back to that cabin, we need to ask you something. If you're watching this from somewhere in Canada, from BC, from the Maritimes, from a small town or a big city, leave us a comment right now and tell us where. One comment is all it takes to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because we're not done. Not even close." The development company's name was La Méridien. Their representative arrived at the property on a morning in April, while Lenora was inside the cabin sorting the letters back into their bundles. She heard a truck on the gravel and came to the door. The man who stepped out was around 45, wearing a down coat that had never seen a hard winter and carrying a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as Sébastien Viau, Regional Acquisitions Director. He offered his hand and his condolences for her loss. In that order. He was not unpleasant. That was the thing she would think about later. He was professional, measured, practiced. He looked around the property with the calm assessment of someone who has learned to see through what a thing is to what it could become. He looked at the listing dock and saw pilings. He looked at the cedar outbuilding and saw square footage. He looked at the aluminum canoe and saw an amenity. He named a figure. It was not zero. It was considerably more than zero. Lenora stood in the cabin doorway with her coat on and listened. He said that of course she was under no obligation, but that a property like this in a flood zone, with aging infrastructure, with no access to municipal services, she should understand that offers like this were uncommon. That the assessed value was, after all, zero. That what his company was offering her was, in his words, a very generous interpretation of the land's potential. Lenora noted that he said potential. She noted that he did not say value. She asked him to give her some time to think. He said of course, absolutely, there was no rush. He left a card on the dock post and drove back down the gravel road. Lenora went back inside. She sat at the writing desk, in the chair Gilles had sat in for 34 years, with the notebook in front of her and the business card beside it. She thought about 211.47. She thought about the fold-out couch at her sister's. She thought about what it meant to be 51 years old with no house, no pension, and a piece of land the municipal assessor had valued at nothing. She let herself think about what the money would do. She was not ashamed of thinking about it. It would buy her somewhere to live. It would buy her a year, maybe two, to find work again, to rebuild something from the floor up. It was the kind of number that could change the shape of a life. She sat there a long time. And then she thought about the dock at the north end of the lake, with the hand-painted sign nailed to the birch. Traverse, crossing, free. She thought about the 14 asterisks in the notebook. She thought about the child's letter in her pocket. You waited. No one else waits. She thought about what a private marina meant for the old woman on the far shore who had no car, and the family with the school-aged children who needed to cross in the morning. And whoever would be out on that ice in February in 11 years from now, when someone else needed a rope thrown over a crack. A marina charges a dock fee. A marina does not paddle out in the dark. She opened the newest notebook to the last page with writing on it. Gilles' last entry was dated 6 weeks before he died, a late October crossing for a man he noted only as l'homme avec le chien roux, the man with the red dog. Below it, a blank page. Lenora looked at it for a long time. Then she put the business card in her coat pocket and the legal document in her bag and drove to Rivière-du-Loup. She did not go to her sister's. She went to the office of a local notary named Hélène Gaudreau, recommended by the young man at the law office in Montreal, who had an office above a hardware store, and a reputation for knowing the land law of the St. Lawrence lowlands better than anyone in the district. Hélène Gaudreau put on her glasses, read the easement, read it again, and set it down on her desk with the particular care of someone handling something that has surprised her. Gilles Aubert filed this, she said. Lenora said yes. Hélène Gaudreau leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then at Lenora. I knew Gilles, she said. Not well, but I knew who he was. He came to see me about 15 years ago. He was thinking through some things about the property. I told him then what I'll tell you now. She tapped the document. This is not a lock that someone can pick. This is a wall. Your cousin didn't register a restriction on this land. He removed the land from the category of things that can be sold for development. It doesn't belong to the market anymore. It hasn't for 17 years. She explained it slowly in the plain language of a woman who has spent a long career translating law into sense. The provincial water safety designation, combined with the conservation easement, meant that La Croix Méridien had no legal path to the property. Eminent domain under Quebec land law could not override a pre-existing public purpose designation. The province had, in effect, already recognized this parcel as a public safety asset. You cannot condemn a thing that is already dedicated to the public good. He must have known the development pressure would come eventually, Hélène said. This kind of shoreline, it always does. He made sure there would be nothing to negotiate when it did. Lenora sat across the desk from this woman she had only just met and felt something loosen in her chest. He didn't tell anyone, she said. It was not really a question. No, Hélène said. He wouldn't. That was Gilles. She paused. He didn't do things so people would know about them. He did them so the thing would still be standing after he was gone. Lenora drove back to the property that evening. She sat in the cabin until it was dark, the wood stove going, the oil lamp on the desk lit. The lake was black through the small window. She could see, if she leaned slightly, the far shore and the lights of the houses over there, the people who had been crossing to Gilles for 30 years not knowing, most of them, that the crossing was also a watch. Sébastien Viau called the following week. He was still pleasant, still measured. He said his company understood, these things took time. He said they were willing to improve their offer. He said he was sure she knew, legal mechanisms available to municipalities for acquiring land for development purposes. Mechanisms that might result in a lower figure than what he was offering her today. He said it gently, the way a man says a threat when he has been taught that the word for it is option. Lenora let him finish. Then she said, I think you should speak to a notary before we continue. She gave him Hélène Gaudreau's name. There was a pause. Is there a reason for that? There's a document registered with the province, Lenora said. Your legal team will want to see it. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of document? The kind that was filed 17 years ago, she said. By a man who apparently understood that you were coming. She heard him on the other end of the line. That particular silence of a person recalibrating. She had been a bookkeeper. She knew the sound of someone discovering that the column they had been counting in was the wrong one. The call came 10 days later, not from Sébastien Viau, but from a lawyer representing La Croix Méridien. Terse, professional, brief. The company was withdrawing its application to acquire the parcel. They had identified alternate shoreline locations for their development. They wished her well. She thanked him and hung up, and sat in the cabin for a long time, in the quiet. The first person to come to the dock, after word got out that the Aubert property had a new caretaker, was a woman, Solange Bélanger, 73 years old, who walked with 2 canes and lived in the cedar house on the East Side Road. She came on a Saturday morning in early May while Lenora was repairing the dock boards with a bag of hardware she had bought at the store above Hélène's office. Solange stood at the shore end of the dock and watched her for a moment. You're the one who inherited? She said. Lenora said she was. Solange looked out at the lake. I used to cross with Gilles every Thursday, to get to the pharmacy. The drive around takes 45 minutes and I don't drive anymore. She paused. I stopped crossing when he got too sick. That was 8 months ago. Lenora looked at the canoe on the bank. Thursday works for me, she said. She did not know how to paddle a canoe, not really. She had been in one twice in her life, at a summer camp when she was 12. But she learned, the way a person learns anything they have no choice about. Badly at first, then less badly, then with a steadiness that begins to feel like it was always there. Solange was a patient passenger. She did not comment on the wobbling. She watched the far shore with the focused calm of a woman who has crossed this water many times and knows there is no rushing it. On the second Thursday, a young man was waiting at the far shore when they arrived. He was maybe 22, a backpack over one shoulder, his coat too thin for the spring cold. He asked, without much hope in his voice, whether this was the crossing. Lenora said yes, it was. He looked at the canoe. How much? Nothing, Lenora said. He looked at her the way people look at something they're not sure they've understood correctly. Then he stepped in. His name was Marcus. But wait, Marcus is in the list of used names. His name was Theo Caron. He was a nursing student at the CGP on the far shore, and he lived in his grandmother's house on Lenora's side of the lake because it was the only free housing he could find. The drive around made him late to his 8 o'clock practical every time he had to take it. He had been taking it every day for 6 months. He paddled back with Lenora that evening and helped her pull the canoe up the bank without being asked. She found the notebooks the following week, the rest of them. They were in the outbuilding, wrapped in a canvas tarpaulin that had kept them dry through years of lake air. There were 11 of them before the one on the desk, 34 years of crossings, beginning with a single entry in the tight hand of a younger man, first crossing. March 22. The ice is almost gone. A woman from the far road needed to reach the church. No motor. Paddled. 40 minutes. She paid me $1. I took it because she needed to. Lenora read them the way she had once audited an account, looking for the shape of the thing, the pattern underneath the numbers. And the pattern she found was not what she expected. She had expected a man devoted to the lake the way some men are devoted to an idea of themselves. What she found was a man devoted to a very specific and unglamorous work. Showing up. Being there. Doing the unremarkable thing over and over until the unremarkable thing became the thing a whole shore depended on. There was no heroism in most of the entries. There were cold mornings and late crossings and passengers who didn't thank him and weather that should have kept any reasonable person inside. There was the record of a man who got up every day and paddled, because if he didn't, someone would go without. And then, tucked between the 8th and 9th notebook, she found a folded piece of paper, not a letter. A note in Gilles's own hand, addressed to no one. If you are reading this, you have come to see what was left. I cannot tell you what to do with it. I can only tell you that the crossing matters more than the person who makes it. The work is not about me. It was never about me. If the dock is standing and the canoe is sound, and someone who needs to cross is standing at the shore, then everything that needed to happen has happened. The rest is just showing up. Lenora read it twice. She folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her coat, where she kept things she did not want to lose. People began to come, after word spread the way. Word spreads in a lakeside community. Through the hardware store, the pharmacy on the far shore, the church hall. They came not in a rush but in the slow, considered way of people who are not sure they will be welcome. An old farmer who had crossed every spring for 20 years to reach the co-op. A teenage girl who had stopped going to her tutoring sessions 8 months ago when the crossing closed. A retired schoolteacher who said she had no practical reason to cross anymore, but had walked down to the shore every Thursday out of habit for 30 years and found, these past months, that the habit without the crossing was a hollow thing. Each of them, without being asked, told Lenora something about Gilles. None of the stories were dramatic. That was what struck her. They were ordinary. He had paddled them across. He had waited when they were late. He had gone back a second time when someone forgot something. He had said little, done what was needed, and gone home. One woman, a retired postal worker named Annette, said something that Lenora turned over in her mind for weeks afterward. She said, "He wasn't the kind of man who made you feel like you owed him something. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the crossing was just a normal thing that happened, like the sun coming up." Lenora thought about what it meant to do a kindness in such a way that the recipient does not feel the weight of it. She thought about all the ways she had been kept afloat in her own life without knowing it. The friend who called, at the right moment. The colleague who covered for her, quietly. The small rescue operations that had happened around her, while she was looking at something else. She thought about the 22 years she had spent with her eyes on the wrong column. She thought about Gilles setting the conservation easement in motion 17 years before, filing it quietly with the province, and going home and paddling the lake the next morning as if nothing had changed. He had built a legal shield around this shoreline and then simply never mentioned it, had never used it as proof of his seriousness, or his foresight, or his sacrifice. He had done it the same way he did everything, as if the doing was its own completion, and the knowing about was somebody else's business. A week after Lac Saint-Pierre withdrew their application, Sébastien Viau called one more time. He was no longer pleasant, not exactly, but he was not rude. He sounded, more than anything, confused. He said he didn't understand. He said the land was worth nothing, technically. He said she had been offered a real number for something with no real value. He asked why a woman in her situation would say no. Lenora thought about how to answer. She was looking out the small window of the cabin at the lake, which was running silver and flat under a thin May sun, and Theo Caron was on the far shore, waiting. "My cousin spent 34 years making sure no one had to cross that lake alone," she said. "And he made sure before he died that it would stay that way. I'm not going to be the one who sells what he paid for with his whole life." A pause. Then, "But you didn't know him?" "No," she said. "I'm getting to know him now." She did not hear from Lac Saint-Pierre again. Spring became summer on Lac Saint-Pierre. Lenora took up residence in the cedar cabin, sleeping on the narrow cot Gilles had used, waking to the sound of water. She found she did not miss the house she was losing. She found, to her surprise, that $211.47 went farther than she had thought when the work is the living, and the living is the work. She started a new notebook. Her handwriting was different from Gilles's. Rounder, less certain, the letters of a bookkeeper accustomed to columns rather than narrative. But she kept the same format. Name, date, note. She did not record the fares, because there were none. She recorded only the crossings. Theo Caron crossed 91 times before his semester ended in June. He brought her coffee one morning without explanation, and was gone again before she could say thank you. The retired schoolteacher came every Thursday, whether she had an errand or not. Solange Boulanger made it to the pharmacy every week and came back with her medications, and occasionally a loaf of bread she pressed into Lenora's hands in a way that did not feel like payment, only like the natural motion of hands that know how to give. One afternoon in July, Annette, the retired postal worker, arrived at the dock with a young woman, maybe 25, who stood at the water's edge, looking at the lake with an expression Lenora recognized. Not fear of the water, something older than that. She did not ask the young woman her name. She only held the canoe steady and said, "Ready when you are." The young woman stepped in. They were halfway across when she said, without turning around, "I didn't think anyone would still be here." Lenora paddled. The lake was flat. "He set it up to last," she said. "I'm just keeping it going." The young woman nodded, and they crossed in silence, and when they reached the far shore she stepped out and said, "Thank you," in a voice that had something in it Lenora couldn't fully name. She watched her to walk up the road and disappear around the bend. Back at the cabin, Lenora opened the notebook and wrote the date, and below it, a young woman, far shore, did not say what for crossed. She set down the pen and looked at the entry for a moment, and then added, waited. She had not done what Gilles had done for 34 years. Not yet. She had paddled an aluminum canoe back and forth across a cold Quebec lake for a few months, and learned the names of her passengers, and tried to read the current the way he had. But in the act of writing that word, waited, she felt something settle, some account in herself that had been running unbalanced for years begin very slowly to correct. She found by midsummer that she did not think about the house going to auction anymore. She did not think about the 22 years or the column her ex-husband had been keeping somewhere else. Those things had happened. They were real, but they were in a different ledger now, and the ledger she was keeping here, on this desk, with this lamp, had more pages than she had yet filled. One evening in August, Theo Caron came to the cabin with a question. He was almost done his nursing program. He had been offered a placement at the hospital in Rivière-du-Loup. He wanted to know, when she couldn't paddle anymore, or when she went on to something else, who would keep the crossing? Lenora looked at him across the table. "Who do you think?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had never paddled a canoe in his life. "I know," she said. "I'll teach you." She began teaching him the following week, the way she imagined Gilles had learned. By doing it badly, and then less badly, and then with a steadiness that begins to feel like it was always there. She taught him to read the current. She taught him the safe route in fog. She showed him the map on the cabin wall, Gilles's annotated map with the danger zones marked, and the observation about the undertow at the north end, never enter there, and she made him study it until he knew it without looking. She showed him the notebooks, all 12 of them, including the new one. She made him read them, all the entries, from the first crossing in March 34 years ago to the most recent one she had written. She made him read the asterisked entries and the entries marked disparu. She made him read the child's letter, the one that said "You waited." "No one else waits," she said. "This is what the crossing is, not the canoe, not the dock. The dock can rot. The canoe can be replaced. This," she set her hand on the stack of notebooks, "this is what you're keeping when you keep the crossing. Every name in here is a person who is somewhere in the world right now because someone showed up. That's the whole job. Showing up." On the last evening of August, Lenora sat at the desk by the small window after Theo had gone. The lake was darkening, the sky going the particular blue of late summer evenings in the St. Lawrence lowlands, a color with violet in it, with the first suggestion of autumn. The lamp on the dock post was lit. She lit it every evening at dusk, the way she had learned Gilles had done, so that anyone out on the water in the dark would have a point of light to aim for. She opened the notebook. She looked at the pages she had filled since March. The names and dates and small notes. The record of people who had crossed. Of mornings when nobody came, and she had simply sat with the canoe and read. Of one cold evening in June, when she had seen someone standing too long at the far end of the dock, and had paddled over and found not an emergency, but an old man who had come to leave a stone on a post, where, years ago, Gilles had left a jar of strawberry preserves outside his door, when no one would have known either way. She picked up the pen. She did not write a tribute to Gilles, because she thought he would have found that embarrassing. She did not write a farewell to the person she had been in March, the woman with $211.47 and no fixed address, and a marriage that had turned out to be built on sand. She only did what Gilles had done for 34 years and what she intended to do for as long as she was able. She kept the record going. Lenora Marsh, keeper of the crossing Lac Saint-Pierre following Gilles Aubert. Show up, no one crosses alone. She set down the pen and looked out the window at the lake. The lamp on the dock cast its circle of yellow light onto the black water. Not far, just enough. Just enough that if someone was out there in the dark and did not know which way the shore was, there was a point to aim for. That, she had come to understand, was all Gilles had ever done. Not a great gesture, not a monument. Just a lamp kept lit. Just a canoe kept ready. just a record kept faithfully of everyone who had needed to cross and been carried safely to the other side. The lake was quiet, the lamp burned on, and somewhere across the water in the houses Lenora could see from the cabin window. There were people who would need to cross in the morning, and she would be there when they did. She closed the notebook. She did not blow out the lamp. Now, if you've made it this far, you already know why this story stayed with us. There's a Gilles Aubert somewhere near most of us, someone who showed up so quietly we didn't notice until they were gone. Leave us a comment below and tell us, who was that person for you? And if you're watching from anywhere in Canada, we'd love to know where. From the prairies to the coast, every comment keeps stories like this one finding their way to the right people. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.